about that, everyone. It is lovely to be back, and it's been a wonderful conference. So thanks to all of the organizers. This has been another brilliant time. This is my 7th presentation at the conference, so I hope that no. I just hope that this one lives up to the magic of that number. You know, that's what I'm going for. But in this presentation, what I want to do is I want to bring the cave scene from Half-Blood Prince into conversation with Jesus's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane from the Gospels. And I think it's fruitful to do that, not least because these scenes kind of represent penultimate struggles before the deaths of these respective figures, but also because it involves imagery of drinking from a cup. And the account, of course, of the cave will be familiar to all of us, right? Dumbledore literally consumes liquid from a cup 12 times, administered by Harry in his attempt to seize the Horcrux at the bottom of the basin. The potion, of course, was consumed to make the consumer dizzy and disoriented, but most importantly, thirsty, which would then lead them to want to consume the water in the cavernous lake, which would then activate the undead Inferi right underneath. And being so incapacitated from the dizzying effects of the fountain, the consumer would be overwhelmed by the Inferi, leaving the Horcrux and the locket untouched. But because Harry was there, they did not succumb to the trap. In the case of Jesus, he does not literally drink from a cup, but he refers to his imminent death as a kind of cup that he must drink, a cup that he prays that the Father would take away from him while his disciples are asleep. Yet Jesus recognizes that avoiding the cup would not agree with his Father's will, and so he does not refuse arrest, ill treatment, and ultimately death on a cross. Now, I won't get into it here, but by referencing this cup, Jesus is tapping into a major set of images from the Hebrew Bible known as the cup of wrath. And I actually have a whole chapter in my forthcoming book on the significance of this in a book on wine and other fermented beverages in biblical literature. I just got the proofs for it, so I'm quite excited about it. But I'm not going to get into what that cup is all about. But what's interesting is that even though there's not a literal cup in this scene, there's plenty of art that depicts the scene with a prominent cup, as you can see from a handful of examples from 14th to 20th century paintings. You can see the cup prominently. This one's a little smaller, but if you look up, you can see the cup atop the hill there. And this one, Jesus is holding the cup. And one final one here. Now, oh, brilliant. Well, we'll get to that. Now, a few other people have noticed that the cave scene evokes something of Gethsemane before me. There isn't any peer-reviewed literature on this. I couldn't find an article, a book chapter, or anything. Only 2 blog posts. And the 2 people who have said something about this are, first up, John Granger. Now, his work is probably familiar to most of us here. And in a short piece that he wrote in 2009 on Hogwarts Professor, he highlights the connections between the 2 scenes. And he notes, for example, Dumbledore's desire for water. And he parallels that with Jesus saying, "I thirst," on the cross in the Gospel of John. And he argues further, beyond the Gethsemane connection, that Dumbledore's rise from drinking the cup, right, and the fiery rescue of Harry from the undead Inferi represents the harrowing of hell tradition. And this is the tradition that Christ rescued saints from Hades to bring them to heaven during the period in which he was dead. Now, for those of you who were there at my talk 2 years ago on eating death, or if you listen to the Potterversity episode on Death Eaters, did I say Potterversity? I said Potterversity. I was like, did I say Potterversary? I want to make sure I got that right. What you'll appreciate is that Christ is bringing people out of the gaping maw of death and Hades, which I think is really significant. Now, the other person who's noticed something about Gethsemane and this scene is a British guy named Liam Thatcher. And he just wrote on his personal blog, several of the same things that Granger did. But what's interesting about his piece is he basically says that the cave scene distorts Gethsemane. It gets it wrong. And he says when you look at when you get past the superficial details, you notice a couple things. For example, Harry's the chosen one, and yet he doesn't drink the cup. Moreover, he contrasts the fact that Dumbledore is reluctant to drink the cup, whereas Jesus is intentional, chooses to drink the cup. But most importantly, for my purposes, Thatcher also contrasts the fact that Harry is present with Dumbledore, whereas Jesus is all by himself. Now, Thatcher's claim that this is really a distortion of Gethsemane is a value judgment that I don't wish to engage just yet. But my main argument is that the allusion to Gethsemane is actually much more specific than either Granger or Thatcher have realized. In fact, one of the traditions that emerged around Gethsemane actually makes sense of the presence of Harry, despite what Thatcher says. And basically, it's not that the cave scene is just evoking Gethsemane straight from the Bible, but it's evoking a specific tradition about Gethsemane. Now, note these verses, which only occur in the Gospel of Luke. These verses come right after Jesus prays for the cup to be taken away, when he says, "Not my will," etc. They read, "And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground." Now, if you're wondering why I have cited the old King James Version here, it's because this is the only English translation that does not signal to readers that these verses were not originally part of the Greek text. Other modern translations will omit these verses. They'll put a footnote after them, or they'll put them in brackets, either double or single brackets, to signal to readers that they are not original. They represent a later addition to the text. If you look at our oldest and best manuscripts, you will not find this passage. And so I just want to illustrate this with one example. And it's from the oldest codex housed at the Vatican, because Emily Strand is here. And so take a look at this. This is Codex Vaticanus, very cleverly named. It's a 4th century manuscript. And I want to zoom in on this bottom corner of this column here. And don't worry, if you don't know Greek, that's all right. I just want to point out that I've highlighted where verse 42 begins and then where verse 45 begins. The diagonal lines is the transition between these passages. Now, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? No, maybe not. Well, so 42 ends with, "Not my will, but yours be done," and then verse 45, "And he rose up from prayer." So these verses, 43 and 44, they don't fit here. They were never part of this passage. They were added later. To illustrate this now with a contemporary translation, I've crossed out these verses so you can see the flow better, right? He prays this prayer, "Not my will, but yours be done," all that, and then he gets up from prayer. So this bit about the angel and the blood, that's all secondary, okay? Yet despite the fact that this passage is dubious and it's a later addition, it became widely disseminated in our manuscript tradition. And it was commonly incorporated into visual representations of Gethsemane in art all the way up to the present day. And as it does so, it combines with the other tradition already noted of a cup being visually represented. And so the cup, as was noted, is being depicted as something that the angel is offering to Jesus. Let me just illustrate this with a handful of examples. In this one, the angel is quite small up there at the top, holding a cup. Similarly, this angel is quite small, but holding a cup for Jesus. Here you can see the angel more clearly, holding a cup. This one's a little smaller yet, but holding a cup. If you look in the top right corner, you can see an angel holding a cup, and you can see Jesus more prominently towards the middle. Again, angel with the cup, angel with the cup. Multiple examples, could go on and on. This one's a contemporary image. Now, outside of paintings, you also see this in Bible illustrations. Some of the most prominent ones were from the 19th century, Gustave Doré and James Tissot. Now, what they're doing is they're illustrating the biblical text, which doesn't mention that an angel's holding a cup. So Gustave Doré has an angel when he's illustrating Luke, but he doesn't have a cup here. Yet when we look at Tissot, there's multiple angels. The image might be a little hard to see. There's multiple angels. The first angel is holding a cup. I don't know if you can see it, but the first angel is holding a cup. The second angel is holding a crown of thorns. And as you go around, there are these like orbs that represent images of different scenes from the Passion. You could even see Veronica's veil. I think it's the fifth angel down. So all these different images that are evoking the Passion, kind of concretizing what the cup represents in this set of images, kind of in an expanded way. Contemporary Bible illustrations do the same thing. Here's Philip Medhurst, where you see an angel with a cup. He has another illustration, angel with a cup. And another example of visual representation that I want to talk about are Jesus films. Now, at present, I'm wrapping up a book project that I'm co-writing on Jesus films, and I've literally seen hundreds of Jesus films. Like, there are way too many of them. Most of the time, it's just Jesus by himself praying. That's it, okay? But a handful will incorporate that Lucan passage, and you'll either get an angel, or you'll get some sweating of blood, or you'll get like the artistic representation that we've seen. So I just want to show you how this works in some Jesus films. Beginning with this Mexican film, El Martirio del Calvario. In this film, while Jesus is praying, he looks up and a cup materializes before him, and he begins to sweat great drops like blood. In the cartoon, The Miracle Maker, which has a fun Harry Potter tie-in because Ralph Fiennes voices Jesus. If you haven't seen this one, it's quite good. It's stop motion, but when the scenes are very emotional, it switches animation style. But in this sequence, while Jesus is praying, he sees a cup, and then a crown of thorns materializes around it. And I get James Tissot vibes from that image. And in a few other examples, you don't see a cup or an angel, but it kind of, again, concretizes what that cup represents. In this Filipino film, Cristo, while Jesus is praying, there's some quick cuts and editing to images of Jesus being tortured and even receiving a crown of thorns, and then blood rushes down his face. The sweat drops. In a similar sort of way, in the German film Der Galiläer, while Jesus is praying, he looks up and he sees a cross and then reaches out to it. It's not a cup, but what the cup represents. In the Palestinian film, a more recent film called The Savior, while Jesus is praying, there's no angel, there's no cup, but he sweats, and there's this focus on his sweat. It's not blood, but it looks like blood. It drops like blood. There's this focus on his sweat. And he isn't visited by an angel here, but surprisingly, he is visited by Satan. Now, this is an interesting sort of twist, because this film actually follows Luke really, really closely. So it's something to take note of. But this figure of Satan is actually just Judas. And what's interesting about this move here is, again, we get the opposite of angelic visitation, but this is actually something of a sub-tradition within Jesus films. It's almost like they want one more final encounter between Jesus and Satan before the crucifixion. And we see this in a handful of films. We see this in the made-for-TV film simply called Jesus. And we also see it most prominently in both the highest grossing and most highly gross Jesus film of all time, The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's film. It opens in Gethsemane, and we see this Satan figure unleash a snake onto Jesus while he is in the midst of praying, and Satan kind of swirls around Jesus throughout his torture and onto the crucifixion. And one final place where we see this kind of sub-theme, it's not in Gethsemane, but on the cross, in the last temptation of Christ, we get one final encounter with Satan, and this is where the title of the film comes from, The Last Temptation. Now, the remaining examples I have explicitly incorporate, or maybe not always explicitly, I'll explain what I mean in a second, an angel. In the film, Jesus, as well as the life of Jesus Christ, these are evangelical and Mormon representations of life of Jesus, respectively. And in each case, they follow Luke pretty closely, including the dubious passage, because they're using the King James. And so you get an angel and you get bloody sweat in both of these films. And the next one is a really convoluted example. Has anybody heard of this film, Assassin 33 AD? Okay, it's absolutely bonkers. It was re-edited and reproduced as Black Easter a couple years after it came out because it was just very highly maligned. There's not worth saving. It's not one of those films that's so bad it's good. It's one of those films that's so bad it's bad, if that makes sense. Here's the short version. This film is highly xenophobic and Islamophobic, but let me just tell you what happens. The short version is that there are some scientists who are unknowingly recruited by some Islamic terrorists to create the ability to instantly transfer an object from one place to another. This is so that they can bomb their targets. That's what we learned subsequently, okay? But the scientists accidentally create the ability to not only traverse space, but also time. And so the terrorists decide that they want to go back in time and kill Jesus before the resurrection so that Christianity never comes into existence. I know, a plot worse than The Cursed Child. But because of this time travel component, the assassins and the scientists unwittingly end up becoming incorporated into the Jesus story. And they take on such key roles as Simon of Cyrene, who carries Jesus' cross. And this character's name is Simon, so it's kind of signposted for us very early on. The two thieves on the cross beside Jesus, as well as the man who runs out of the Garden of Gethsemane naked in Mark's Gospel, which is a super deep cut, by the way. And the angels that appear to the women at the empty tomb on Easter Sunday. Now, for our purposes, there's one final example, which is the Gethsemane scene. Now, this conversation that Simon has with Jesus is so crazy, I can't get into all of it, but basically, Simon sees Jesus, Jesus addresses him in Aramaic, and Simon says, "No speako Greeko." And then Jesus performs the miracle of suddenly being able to speak in English, which Simon realizes is a language that doesn't exist yet. And so that's how he knows he's the Son of God. And then I guess the conversation goes so well that it ends with Jesus saying, "Your words are encouraging. You have given me strength." And because of the way that this film has all these characters playing out these roles in the Gospels, I would suggest that Simon here is fulfilling that tradition of the angelic visitation of Jesus from the dubious passage in Luke. Now, my 5 remaining examples are much more straightforward, and they correspond to the artistic representation that we saw earlier. Beginning with this French film by Alice Guy, La Vie du Christ, you see an angel holding a cup rather prominently. Another French film, La Vie et Passion de Notre Seigneur Jésus-Christ, you have an angel with a cup. This Italian film, Christus, an angel with a cup hands it to Jesus. Jesus takes the cup, drinks it, and gives it back to the angel. In this Indian film, simply called Jesus, you have an angel holding a cup who then extends the cup out. Jesus reaches for it, and a beam of light is transferred between them. And then my final example, in The Last Temptation of Christ, directed by Martin Scorsese, you have an angel who appears, and he looks exactly like the beloved disciple John. But it's not John. John is sleeping along with Peter and James. Now, this is a really unique take, and if you don't know The Last Temptation of Christ, it's just full of unique takes, just FYI. But this angel drinks the cup and then hands it to Jesus and then holds him while he drinks the cup. And from this overview of visual representation of Gethsemane in art, Bible illustrations, and Jesus films, we can see that there is a detectable tradition of representing an angel giving Jesus a cup as he prays in Gethsemane. And I contend that it's this strand of the tradition that the cave scene specifically evokes. So then, does Harry Potter get Gethsemane wrong, right, as Liam Thatcher claims? I think there are some important elements of Gethsemane that Harry Potter actually opens up for us with respect to Jesus' suffering. The cave scene highlights Jesus' humanity and points to the fact that the suffering he experienced there was real and not omniscience masquerading as uncertainty. In classical Christian theology, Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. And yet, functionally, many Christians forget the fully human part, but the cave scene won't let us forget. In Thatcher's reading, Harry Potter gets Gethsemane wrong because Jesus' fortitude is stressed in the Gospels. But I would say this is to miss the point of his prayer. Harry Potter simply reflects what is already expressed in the story, albeit with tension, that Christ did struggle to go through what he knew he needed to do. And moreover, it's not that the reception of Gethsemane moves from the Bible straight to Harry Potter. As we've seen, it gets to Harry Potter by means of an evolving tradition, a secondary literary tradition mediated through the visual arts. And as that tradition further suggests, Jesus' struggles were so real that his sweat was like blood, and he had need of a ministering presence. And so I conclude where the scene itself concludes, with the beautiful words of Dumbledore that perhaps take on a new resonance in the light of this connection. As Harry helps Dumbledore out of the cave, we read, "I am not worried, Harry," said Dumbledore, his voice a little stronger despite the freezing water. "I am with you." Thank you.